Today I'm down here in Southern California taking a look at the all-new 2019 third generation Volvo S60 sedan. For this generation, you really can think of the S60 as the Volvo S90's mini-me, not just in terms of overall style, but in terms of overall amenities on the inside. For you wagon lovers out there, fear not, Volvo has not forgotten you, and there will be an all-new V60 wagon as well, coming a little bit later. We'll have a separate video on that particular model. That means that Volvo will have two basic wagons and four different flavors eventually, because you can get the V60, the V90, and both of those vehicles will be available in cross-country flavors, which will be slightly elevated and have a little bit more rugged cladding on the outside. But in this video, we're here to talk about the sedan. As with Volvo's other recent models, the front end is definitely designed in an elegant and restrained fashion, but I don't find this austere like the Jaguar XE. That's pretty typical, of course, for the luxury segment, especially for European luxury brands. If you want something that's a little bit overly styled, perhaps, then you might want to look at something like the Lexus IS. Up front, we get standard LED headlamps with the distinctive Volvo Thor's hammer in there. These are full LED units, LED high beams and LED low beams, and this center strip turns into the turn signal when you put your blinker on. We have fog lamps below and well-integrated parking sensors. Volvo is a brand that is absolutely obsessed with safety. So as you'd expect out of any modern Volvo, we have all of their latest safety systems on the S60, and a lot of them are standard. This generation of Volvo's City Safety System will not only do automatic emergency braking for frontal collisions, it also detects pedestrians, cyclists, large animals like moose and certain types of deer. There's a fairly aggressive lane keeping assistance system. We also have available semi-autonomous driving. This is a hands-on system, sort of like Tesla's autopilot system, although the steering is not as aggressive as what we see in the Tesla units, and it doesn't do lane changes for you. But in that vein, it is pretty similar to the semi-autonomous systems from Mercedes, Audi, and BMW. The blind spot monitoring system now has a rear cross-traffic detection autonomous brake feature. So if you're backing out of an alley and there's cross-traffic that it thinks is going to hit you, this will attempt to slow you down or stop you to mitigate that accident. That's in addition, of course, to run-off road mitigation and now oncoming traffic mitigation. So if the car thinks that someone is steering into your lane, it will pre-charge the brakes. It won't attempt to stop you, but it'll pre-charge them. That way, when you do apply the brakes, all that stopping power is immediately available. The overall side profile of the S60 has changed significantly in this generation. We get this new long hood design. It is fairly horizontal, which gives us those classic luxury car proportions. We also have an overall design that looks a little bit more rear-wheel drive than front-wheel drive based, with this long distance between the door and the front tire right there. That's enabled by the fact that this uses Volvo's latest platform that is shared with the S90, XC90, XC60, etc. At 187.4 inches long, this is exactly the same length as the new Volvo V60, and it is a significant stretch over the previous generation S60. A lot of that room goes right back here to the back seats, which were a little bit small for the segment before, but now are among the largest. We also get one of the largest trunks in this segment and a definite trunk back here, not a shortened off sort of sloping angle like we found in the last S60. It gives this overall a more classic luxury proportion. A number of you over on our Facebook page were asking some questions about the overall size of the S60 and where it fits in the landscape. Well, as you can see down there at the bottom of your screen, this is not as long as an Infiniti Q50, which is sort of a tweener vehicle. It slots between the compact luxury category and the mid-size luxury category. Volvo is still calling this a compact luxury sedan. So this competes very directly with the 3 Series, the A4, the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, the Lexus IS, Cadillac ATS, etc. But this is a little on the long side for the segment overall, although we do expect the 3 Series to grow in its upcoming new generation, and it's probably going to be about this same size overall. This is notably shorter than something like a Honda Accord, which is a mid-size sedan in America, but it is a little bit longer than a Honda Civic if you want to compare this to more mainstream varieties. This is significantly shorter than an S90, however, because that is more than a foot longer. Depending on the country you're watching this video, a few different engines will be available under this hood. But in a big departure from Volvo's past, there will be no diesel engine offered in the S60 or V60, we're told. This is the first time in recent memory that Volvo has released a new vehicle with no diesel in its future. For the United States, things will start out with a T5 engine. That is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, produces 250 horsepower. Then we step up to this engine right here, which is a T6. That does not take away the turbocharger, but it adds a supercharger for 316 total horsepower. Then we get the T8 plug-in hybrid system out of the XC90 and XC60, and that produces 400 horsepower by adding an electric motor to the turbocharger and the supercharger. So this is the only turbocharged, supercharged hybrid plug-in available in the United States at this time. All engines are mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission. The T6 gets standard all-wheel drive, the T5 is front-wheel drive only, and again, the T8 is the E all-wheel drive system. In kind of an interesting twist, Volvo rates all S60 and V60 models with an actual towing capacity of 2,000 pounds. If you want a little bit more shove in your S60, then you can get this model right here, which has this interesting little badge on the front. This is not a full-on performance version of the S60. Arguably, it's not quite an S60R replacement either. But what we get under the hood are some interesting performance upgrades. So this is the same T8 power plant that we find in the lesser T8 models, but they have increased the power a little bit, up to 415 horsepower and 494 pound-feet of torque. After that point, most of the changes in the Polestar Engineered S60 primarily focus on handling and a little bit on style. We get a little different front bumper down here than we find in the other models. There's a lot more black going on the vehicle. We get Öhlins dampers that can be adjusted via these little knobs right here under the hood. Volvo tells us that they opted not to use an adaptive damper technology in this vehicle because they didn't like the way adaptive suspensions really behave when it comes to overall performance dynamics. They felt that these were a little bit better. We get strut braces, large Brembo brakes all the way around, yellow seat belts, and all the other changes that you see on your screen right now. I've moved over the shade so you can see the tail lamp modules a little bit better. We have basically the same sort of shape that we see in other modern Volvo sedans. Backup lights are right here in the middle of the tail lamp module, and the turn signals, as you can see, are red, not amber like we see in the XC40. I actually think that is a little bit of a pity because I do prefer amber turn signals. Volvo tells us that this was entirely a style choice. They think Americans prefer red turn signals, so be sure to let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. This model is the R design trim, so you've noticed up front we have the black accents. Those continue out back. Well integrated exhaust tips right there in the rear bumper. These are actually real exhaust tips, so exhaust gases are actually coming out of those openings, not like the fake ones that we see in a lot of modern Audi products. In Europe, only one rear fog lamp is required, and that's why we have this asymmetrical design with the rear fog lamp over here on the driver's side only. As you'd expect out of a modern Volvo, front seat comfort is excellent. The model that we're driving has extending thigh cushions and a 4-way lumbar support. We also have available front seat massage, which is actually apparently the only entry in this segment that offers that particular feature. That's because Volvo basically is just using the same seats that we find in their upper end models and bringing them right down here to the S60 and V60. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column, which is a little bit unusual in this segment these days, but Volvo is dedicated to a manual steering column. 2-position driver memory over there on the door, and the front passenger seat has exactly the same range of motion as the driver's seat. The biggest change between this generation of the S60 and the ones that preceded it is really right back here in the rear passenger area, because the S60 has never really been known for a great deal of rear passenger legroom. This is a frequent question I get about any compact luxury car. Remember that even though this starts at about $40,000 or so, it is still a compact vehicle, as are the other entries in this particular segment. So if you're looking for more legroom with a similar price tag, your only real option would be to move across to something like a Lexus ES, which is not really in the same segment as the 3 Series, C-Class, S60, etc. Headroom is also fairly generous. If I sit upright in this seat back, my hair is touching the ceiling. I have about a 1/4 inch left, but I don't have to cock my head to one side. In terms of overall comparisons, that puts this sort of in the middle of the pack as far as rear headroom goes. The V60 gets about 1/2 inch of additional headroom. If I move over to the center seating position, then my head does touch the ceiling. If I lean back, I do have to kind of crane my head to one side in order to touch that headrest back there. If I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, you'll notice the big difference between this and the previous generation model, and that is that I actually have a little bit of legroom back here, about 1 inch left or so. Rear passengers get a fold-down center armrest, there are cup holders that pop out of there, and a storage compartment behind. We also have available 4-zone climate control, which is another unique feature in this segment. Again, thanks to its relationship to the S90, they just brought that feature right back down. We have a 120-volt power inverter there, but interestingly enough, no USB charge ports back there. We have fold-down 60/40 rear seats, not 40/20/40 folding rear seats like we find in Volvo's wagon lineup, and they are electrically actuated by a button over here behind the driver. Now, I think that's actually kind of an odd choice in a way because there is no corresponding button over here on my side. So if you want to fold down the rear seats, you do have to go to this side of the vehicle, press that button, then you can fold down the seat back that I'm sitting against. In addition to growing the passenger compartment, Volvo has also made the trunk significantly larger than before, and have given it really more of a trunk shape. Because the previous generation S60 arguably had a trunk opening that was a little bit taller than it actually was deep, and this is a little bit more evenly arranged. It also is large for this segment at 15.6 cubic feet. And spare tire fans rejoice because Volvo has actually given us a compact spare tire under there rather than just giving us a blank spot like the last generation model. We also apparently have some high visibility vests in there. Not sure whether those are standard or not. As we look around this interior, keep in mind that we are in an R-Design trim with a number of options, so this isn't going to be exactly what you'll see in some of the other trims. All S60 models for 2019 do have a standard panoramic roof, as Volvo calls it, but in reality it is a little bit more of a moonroof and a half because it actually doesn't go all the way back there to the rear passengers' heads. That likely was for structural rigidity reasons, because obviously cutting a big hole in the top of your sedan is going to make its body a little bit less rigid than it would be otherwise. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts, which is a feature that we're actually starting to see a little bit less of in the luxury segment. And we have fixed height headrests, as we've seen in Volvos for some time. Although a nice touch with this generation of the latest Volvos is that the back of the headrest now is made of stitched material rather than a hard plastic. It gives it more of a premium feel, especially for the rear seat passengers. And a kind of interesting touch, the rear seats also get that same sort of treatment. The seats are a combination of Nappa leather and fabric in the R design, which is another really interesting choice. So this is actually real leather in there, and it's a higher grade of leather than we find in the average car. We have a little Swedish flag right there on the side of the seat, as we see in other modern Volvos. As you'd expect out of a modern luxury car, the front door panels are made from mainly soft touch materials. There are a few hard plastics going on lower, but actually the bulk of this door is made from a slush injection molded plastic. We have more matching fabric right there in that center insert in the door. Moving from the doors on over to the dashboard, we find the optional Bowers & Wilkins speakers there that our particular model has, and then a stitched leather dashboard, which is something that Volvo has done to really great effect in a lot of their recent vehicles, like the XC90, XC60, and S90. Now, unlike the higher-end series of Volvo's luxury sedans, just the dashboard is the stitched leather, so the doors are not leather in this particular vehicle. Down here we have real aluminum trim in the dashboard. There's also wood trim available, as you'd expect out of a luxury car. This is designed to give it a little bit more of a sporty feel. And the overall design theme is a little bit different than some of the other Volvos that we see in the US, a little bit different than the XC60, for instance, but definitely closely related. As we move on over to the center of the dashboard, we find the center channel speaker in that Bowers & Wilkins system. Again, that's optional. We have two large air vents on either side of this large standard color infotainment screen. This is running Volvo's latest Sensus software. They tell us that for 2019, we have a processor that's 50% faster than before, so screen transitions are definitely a little bit snappier. The previous generation of the software, sometimes it could get lost if you were swiping between one option and another. Loading apps like Pandora there on the system is definitely faster than it was before. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard in this infotainment system, not something you have to pay extra for like we see in modern BMW models. If you want to know more about Sensus, we have a complete video review on that system on our channel as well. Below the screen, we have basically the same row of buttons that we see in other Volvo models. Hazard light button, front window defogger, rear defroster, track forward, backward, a volume knob right there with play and pause. And then moving down from there, we have a very small storage cubby. I'm not quite clear what you'd fit in that one because even the car's key is just a little bit small. It just barely fits in there. And then you can close that door right there as long as you don't have like a key holder on it right there. We have a pretty traditional shifter, not like the digital one that we find in all XC40 models, although the T8 version of the S60 will get Volvo's digital shifter. Drive is all the way to the back, manual mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for up, pull towards the driver for gear down. We have a 12-volt power port right there, and then three sort of eccentrically shaped cup holders. There are two more traditional round ones back here, and then you could use this one for, say, juice boxes or something along those lines. We have our toggle for start-stop. We toggle it to the right to stop the engine, toggle it to the right again to start the engine back up. Drive mode button down here that allows us to choose between Eco, Comfort, Individual, and Dynamic in this particular model. We have an electric parking brake and a power brake hold button right there. Between the front seats, we have a softly padded armrest. This opens to reveal a moderately sized storage cubby. We have two USB inputs right there. It could be a little bit larger, but this vehicle is equipped with the optional 4-zone climate control, which again, you can see from this angle. We have a heated seat button right there. And then if we press that lock button, you'll see that we have temperatures displayed right there. On the driver's side, we have a full LCD instrument cluster. Large speedometer on the left, tachometer on the right, And the tachometer does change to a power gauge if we move over to the eco mode. There are a few different skins you can choose. There's a slightly different look when we move into that dynamic mode. The display is controlled via some buttons on the steering wheel, but it's not as configurable as some of the Cadillac displays that we see, but you can still change your media source. You can deal with your navigation stops right there like that, and you have access to your trip computer readouts. The steering wheel is a variation on what we see in other modern Volvos. We have shift paddles on the back, down on the left, and up over there on the right. They are plastic paddles. We have a leather-wrapped wheel, but not a leather-wrapped airbag cover, which I again think is a little bit of a pity because I wish Volvo would dress up the airbag as well as the dressing on the dashboard. The dashboard looks really premium, but then the airbag looks just a little bit out of place. We have the buttons for the radar adaptive cruise control system over here on the left side, distance, increase, decrease. We toggle side to side to move from the standard cruise control mode to the pilot assist mode. And then over here on the right side, we have buttons for the infotainment system. This button controls that multifunction LCD instrument cluster, and then you would use these buttons to navigate around that menu. There's a voice command button right there. If you get the Polestar Engineered trim, then we get these yellow seat belts all the way around. You can see right back there in the rear seats and in the front seats. But the overall seat design is relatively the same as the R-Design trim. If I look down here to the center console, you'll notice the big difference between the T8 and T6 and T5 versions of the car. So since this is the T8, we have the crystal shifter here. It's the digital shifter, very much like we see in the XC40. It's a double toggle back to drive, double toggle forward to reverse. It's a little bit different than we see, for instance, in BMW models. The cup holders, which is a good place to store your smartphone in case you're wondering, we're reduced to 2 instead of the 3 cup holder design. The center console becomes quite a bit smaller, so if I open this up, there's just a very small area there where you can put smartphones with the 2 USB inputs, 12-volt power port, and then we don't get 4 climate control zones in this model because the battery is occupying this entire center tunnel right here. We still have heated rear seats and a 12-volt power port. We actually get a little bit less legroom right there in the center seating position because of the location of the battery pack. But other than that, the rest of this interior really is the same, and the trunk remains exactly the same because the battery is, again, right here, not in the trunk. Now clearly we haven't been driving the S60 at home, so we don't have official 0 to 60 times, but they do appear to be quite competitive according to the manufacturer. Volvo tells us that the base T5 front-wheel drive model should go 0 to 60 in 6.3 seconds. That is faster than a BMW 320i, but not as fast as a BMW 330i. But when you compare these models to the next category up, it makes a lot of sense. So the S60 T5 at 6.3 seconds, 0 to 60, is going to be faster than a 320i. The S60 T6 all-wheel drive, which I spent most of the morning driving, that's going to be faster than a BMW 330i at 5.3 seconds, 0 to 60. And this T8 plug-in hybrid model, depending on which version you get, will be either 4.4 seconds, 0 to 60, or 4.3 for the model with the yellow seat belts. That's because yellow seat belts clearly add about 15 horsepower, in case you didn't know. Is that deadpan enough? Not wanting to get too ahead of myself because we will be talking about pricing later, but Volvo does price their vehicles competitively. So the 330i is priced more like a T6 trim, the T8 trim is priced more like a 340, just in case you were wondering at this point. Volvo is one of the few manufacturers that has actual manufacturer estimates for 60 to 0 times. We will, of course, be recording our own once we get this on our own home turf for a week. But Volvo says that most versions will go from 60 miles an hour to 0 in about 115 feet, which is quite logical. It's pretty in tune with the rest of the segment. Most of the vehicles that you'll be finding on dealer lots will have 235 with tires on them, so it's fairly wide rubber. Now, this Polestar Engineered trim, I suspect, is going to stop shorter than that because we have 6-piston Brembo calipers, and we actually have slotted rotors from the factory. The big thing to know about the S60 is that it's not going to behave quite like the German competition. At least the BMW and Mercedes competition, because actually I find a lot of corollaries between the way that the Volvo drives and the Audi A4 especially. The base model is a front-wheel drive car, just like the base model of the Audi A4, but then we move on up into the T6 trim, which can send 50% of engine power to the rear, even when there is no slip up front. And that definitely doesn't have the same kind of driving dynamics that you'd expect in a front-wheel drive car. So it's not going to drive like a Lexus ES or a front-wheel drive Acura TLX or, obviously, the front-wheel drive S60. Volvo has also tried to move as much weight to the rear of the vehicle as possible, so although we don't have official weight balance numbers for this model yet, I suspect that it's probably going to have a better weight balance than the Audi A4 as well, likely definitely better than the Audi S4. Then we move on up to this T8 model, which is what we're driving right here. And this has a very different driving dynamic than the others because we have over 300 horsepower on the front axle, over 300 pound-feet of torque in the model that we're driving right here, and then the balance of the horsepower and torque happens out back in the rear. And you can control this in several different interesting ways. So I can put this in a pure mode right there via that touchscreen. And now the vehicle is electric only, and it's going to be a little bit more aggressive at staying electric only as I dig deeper in the throttle. So now as I go around these corners, it's a rear-wheel drive car. But then when I command more acceleration, it's going to spin up the engine and send more power to the front wheels. If I was in snow or some other tricky situation, I can choose constant all-wheel drive. And this is a mode that is lacking in other e-all-wheel drive systems, for instance, the Lexus e-all-wheel drive systems out there, because up to perhaps around 160 horsepower total, or maybe somewhere around 300 pound-feet of torque required, this vehicle is going to try and balance power to the front axle and the rear axle. It can do that because I'm sitting right next to this absolutely massive battery pack. This is much bigger than the batteries that we find in the Lexus hybrid systems, and that's why this vehicle can send so much more power to the rear axle than those Lexus systems. So if you're in a stickier situation, this is going to feel more like a traditional all-wheel drive vehicle with a center coupling, for instance, than those Lexus hybrid models, and it is noticeable. And what I've always loved about Volvo's hybrid system is that we get absolutely excellent fuel economy as well, talking a little bit out of order here, because if I were to put this in its regular hybrid model, you should be getting about 28 to 30 miles per gallon on average in this vehicle, very similar to what we've received on average in Volvo's other plug-in hybrids. That's also the other surprising aspect of this vehicle, because in our recent tests of the S90, for instance, it got better fuel economy than a Lexus GS hybrid while delivering considerably better performance. We also see something similar in the XC60 versus the Lexus NX hybrid. We get almost double the power in that vehicle, but actually very similar hybrid fuel economy. Now, the Lexus ES hybrid is going to be more efficient than this, but this is almost twice as powerful. We get 400 horsepower out of this hybrid system, and that is an awful lot more than we find in the Lexus. An interesting corollary to this in a way would be something like the Acura RLX Sport Hybrid. But again, the RLX Sport Hybrid doesn't have as large of a battery pack, so it cannot send as much power to the rear axle under a wider variety of situations like we see in this vehicle. The T6R design is what we spent most of our day in so far today, and that suspension definitely has a solid, firm European feel. So I think it's definitely firmer than what we see in the Acura TLX, definitely obviously firmer than the Lexus ES, and very, very similar to, I would say, certain versions of the BMW competition, especially the sportier M Sport or M Performance versions of the BMW competition, which actually surprised me a little bit. I expected it to be a little bit softer, perhaps a little bit closer to the Mercedes. In terms of overall cabin noise, this actually is a fairly quiet cabin. We haven't been at home, so I can't give you official cabin noise numbers, but I suspect this is probably going to be somewhere around 71 decibels, basically the same as the average entry in this segment. This Polestar Engineered version has slightly grippier tires. They are a little bit louder, but it is still actually a fairly quiet cabin. The overall driving dynamics of this vehicle aren't quite the same as that next level up, even something like the Audi S4. Because even though the Audi S4 does tend to plow a little bit more into the corners because of that front heavy weight bias versus something like a BMW 340i, it still has a slightly more traditional feel when you start applying power, because it can send more power to the rear axle than this Volvo S60 can. This S60 again is limited to that 87 horsepower or so and somewhere approaching 200 pound-feet of overall torque, but this still holds the road really well, and it is an awful lot of fun to drive, definitely more than I thought. But you can also have that hint of environmental responsibility. Before we talk about pricing, we do need to talk about the one downside to this hybrid system. It clearly adds weight to the S60. And I would not be surprised if this turns out to be the heaviest entry in this particular segment, because that's definitely what we see, for instance, in the Volvo XC60. It gets quite heavy for that compact crossover segment. And you will notice that when you start pushing this in the corners. Even though we have those grippy tires in this particular model, they do start to squeal, and eventually they'll give way, and they will give way before the tires that you find on a BMW 340i. But you can have quite a large amount of fun, and the operational costs are likely going to be lower on this. So how much will the S60 cost, and when can you get your hands on one? Well, they're actually being built in the United States, in South Carolina to be exact. So you'll be able to get your hands on these likely sooner than in other markets in the world, including possibly even Sweden. We're told to expect them in dealers sometime around the latter half of the 2018 calendar year, with good dealer stock happening likely in early 2019. The V60 will follow just a little bit later. In terms of overall price, the S60 will start at $35,800. That will get you the base Momentum trim in front-wheel drive. If you want the R-Design trim, that will be at least $41,900. Again, for the T5 model in front-wheel drive, inscription $42,900. What's interesting with Volvo's lineup is that they're offering the S60 with T5 and T6 engines in all three of those mainline trims. So if you want the 316 horsepower up front, you can get that in the base trim at $40,300. That's actually less expensive than the upper end trims of the base T5 engine. If you want the T8 model, however, then you only get R-Design trims or inscription trims. And then the model that we're looking at right here, which is the Polestar Engineered vehicle, based on the T8 trim of the R-Design form, this is only available in the Care by Volvo subscription program, which is a little bit of a twist in this segment. Volvo's new subscription plan was first launched with the XC40, and it's their attempt to change the way people own cars in the US, at least luxury cars. You have one fixed monthly payment. It starts at $775 for the S60, goes on up to $850 for the T5 R-Design model, or the model that we're looking at right here can be had for $1,100 a month if there were any available, because they've actually already all been spoken for the 2019 model year. The monthly price includes insurance regardless of where you live in the United States. That's actually a big deal. So if you live in an expensive insurance area like some city areas, this could actually be a good value versus a traditional lease. It includes 15,000 miles a year, complete maintenance on the vehicle for your entire period in the program, including tires, windshield wipers, and other wear items. So actually on the Polestar, that could be an even better deal because you could burn these tires off pretty quickly. After the first 12 months in the program, you also have the option of moving up or down to a different Volvo vehicle, but that will reset your subscription timeline of 24 months. Now, it is worth noting that there are limited quantities of vehicles available for this program, we're told, so do keep that in mind. For instance, the XC40 had some difficulties initially because they leased far more vehicles through this program than they'd initially anticipated. You should also keep in mind that the available options are a little bit limited. So in this program, you will get this particular car right here for $1,100 if one was available. Or you could get an R-Design in some very specific trim levels and equipment levels for that $850 per month range. So you don't have the ability to choose this package, that package, and then insert it into the program. They're all pre-built cars. You also can't do overseas delivery on those vehicles. Although it is also worth noting that we're not sure if you'll be able to do overseas delivery on the S60 at all, because of course, it's not built overseas, it's built in South Carolina. You will, of course, have to wait until we can get our hands on the S60 for a complete week so we can run it through our usual battery of tests and comparisons, give you our official detailed numbers on the S60 and how it stacks up. But at the moment, I could tell you that it actually compares very well with the mainline European competition, and still very well when you compare this against the likes of the Asian competition, like the Acura TLX, the Genesis G70, and the Lexus IS. The big difference between this and some of the European entries is that the S60 is, of course, not a rear-wheel drive biased or based vehicle. So the BMW 330, the Mercedes-Benz C300, they're going to send their power by default to the rear wheels. That is going to give you a different driving dynamic. But this is very, very similar to something like the Audi A4. Again, you will have to wait until we do our complete review on this car for our detailed comparison section. But in the meantime, if you are shopping for a new sedan in this segment, I would definitely say put this on your shopping list, whether you're looking at a BMW 3 Series or Mercedes-Benz C-Class, or definitely some of those Asian options, but you're looking for something that's a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit more European, definitely put the Volvo on your shopping list. Hit that subscribe button down there if you haven't already done so. Click up there to the top of your screen so you can support this channel. I hope you want to. You can head over to facebook.com as well to see what we're driving this week. I'll see you later.